Okay, let's dive in. You've probably seen the headlines, maybe heard the chatter about massive tariffs, this whole India-U.S. thing in 2025, and maybe even that pretty alarming claim that India cut off America's life-saving medicines.
Mm-hmm.
So today we're going to cut through some of that noise. We want to figure out what really motivated that huge 50% tariff, see what the actual impact was, and definitely sort out the fact from fiction on the whole medicine export story. Because it's complicated. Right, so a lot of people jump to calling it tariff revenge, simple tit-for-tat. But looking into it, the sources suggest it wasn't quite that straightforward. There were sort of two layers to this 50%.
That's exactly right. It wasn't just one blanket decision. It really happened in two distinct phases. First, there was an initial 25% tariff. Now, this was presented more as, let's say, reciprocal.
Okay.
It was tied to these long-running U.S. complaints about, market access in India, the whole tariff king narrative, basically a negotiating tool.
Right, a standard, well, maybe not standard, but a recognizable trade pressure tactic.
Sort of, yeah.
But then came the second 25%. That pushed it up to that really eye-watering 50%. What triggered that big jump?
That's where the geopolitics really kicked in. That additional 25% was clearly punitive, and it was directly linked to India continuing to buy discounted Russian oil, despite the situation in Ukraine. It was pressure.
And didn't U.S. officials like Treasury Secretary Yellen previously kind of signaled they were okay with India buying Russian oil to keep energy markets stable?
Yes, exactly. That's what makes it so interesting. There was this, apparent contradiction. First, a sort of tacit acceptance, or at least understanding, for global stability reasons. Then, this sharp pivot to punitive tariffs over the same oil purchases.
So quite the policy reversal.
It really highlights the transactional nature of the relationship, doesn't it? You see U.S. demands for strategic alignment clashing head-on with India's push for, foreign policy autonomy and just securing affordable energy.
Okay, so policy and geopolitics aside for a moment, what did this 50% tariff actually do on the ground in India? To the economy, to people?
Oh, the impact was immediate and pretty severe, especially for those sectors that employ a lot of people. We're talking textiles, gems and jewelry, seafood, leather goods. These industries often work on very thin margins.
Right.
So a 50% tariff basically priced them out of the U.S. market overnight. Just think, Indian ready-made garments suddenly faced an effective tariff rate of around 62% getting into the U.S.
62%? Wow.
Yeah, while their competitors, say from Bangladesh or Vietnam, were paying maybe 15-20%.
That's an impossible gap to bridge.
It really is, and it translates directly into job losses. Sources were warning about potential factory closures in places like Tirupur and Noida. For gems and jewelry, some estimates suggested exports to the U.S. could fall by as much as 75%.
75%.
And then there's the bigger picture, the macro level, potentially shaving half a percentage point, maybe 0.6% off India's GDP. Plus, it really disrupted their efforts to diversify supply chains, that whole China plus one strategy.
Sure. Yeah, that economic hit sounds incredibly painful, rippling out from specific industries to the whole economy, which perhaps explains why that other narrative gained traction, the one about India cutting off medicines. Let's tackle that. Was there any truth to it?
Okay, let's be really clear here. That narrative is factually incorrect. It's just not what happened. India plays a massive role, the pharmacy of the world. They supply something like 35% of generic drugs in the U.S.
Including really critical ones, right?
Absolutely. Life-saving, cancer drugs, things like that. The U.S. healthcare system relies heavily on India for affordable medicines.
So where did the cutoff idea come from?
It seems to stem from a very specific temporary situation back in 2020, right at the peak of the first COVID wave.
Mm-hmm.
India put a temporary hold on exporting one specific drug, hydroxychloroquine. It was a public health move to ensure they had enough at home.
Just one drug. And temporary.
Yes, and it was lifted pretty quickly. It wasn't political leverage. It was about managing a health crisis.
Okay, that's a crucial distinction. But here's the kicker, right? Pharmaceuticals were excluded from these 2025 tariffs.
Exactly, and this is fascinating. The Indian pharmaceutical sector was explicitly carved out. Why? Because the U.S. administration knew perfectly well that tariffs on Indian medicines would cause a massive healthcare problem for Americans.
So they needed those drugs too much to include them in the tariffs.
Precisely. It shows how vital that supply chain is, and it kind of prioritized U.S. domestic health needs over applying pressure across the board.
So what we're seeing is this incredibly complex picture. Strategic goals bumping up against national needs, geopolitics versus, well, healthcare reality.
Absolutely. It's a delicate balance, or maybe an imbalance. And, this whole crisis, it's definitely damaged trust on both sides. Sources suggest it's really pushed India to think harder about diversifying its economy and its strategic partners, moving away from relying too heavily on any single country, including the U.S.
Which leads us, and you, with something to think about.
Yeah, what does this episode really tell us about the future of these big global partnerships? How do nations square immediate political aims with the need for stable, long-term cooperation, especially when dependencies are so deep?